Los Angeles never felt like the city people imagined. There were no sunsets frozen in postcards, no endless beaches filled with laughter, no promises hanging in the air. What existed instead was concrete that absorbed heat during the day and released it at night like a slow-burning wound. Streets that pretended to be alive long after hope had gone home. Lamps flickering with the exhaustion of those who had watched too much and intervened too little. Clara learned early that cities could feel like traps. Los Angeles was the largest one she had ever known. She lived between neighborhoods that never fully claimed her, places where the buildings leaned slightly forward, as if listening, where doors were reinforced not to keep storms out, but to keep memories from coming back in. Her apartment sat above a closed laundromat, its windows permanently clouded, its signs still promising services no one believed in anymore. At night, the vibration of passing trains crept through the floor and settled in her chest, a reminder that movement existed somewhere else. Her life had become a series of carefully measured routines. Wake before dawn. Leave before the neighbors. Avoid mirrors when the light was cruel. Carry her past like a quiet illness, invisible, but always present. She had not planned on meeting Miguel. They crossed paths in a place neither of them belonged to anymore. A dim cafe wedged between a bail bonds office and a shuttered video store. One of those locations that survived purely because no one cared enough to replace it. The air smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. The tables were chipped, the chairs mismatched, the silence broken only by a radio that couldn't find a station. But Miguel looked like someone who had learned how to disappear without leaving, not invisible, just forgettable, in the way that felt intentional. He sat alone, shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around a cup he didn't drink from. There was something worn about him, not in the clothes but in the posture, as if life had taught him to expect impact at any moment. His presence didn't demand attention, it invited it quietly. Clara noticed him because he didn't look at her. In a city where everyone measured value with glances, his restraint felt unfamiliar. Their connection didn't begin with words, it began with repetition. The same hour, the same seats, the same silence stretched between them like a thin wire. Over days, then weeks, familiarity settled in. They became part of each other's peripheral vision, two lives brushing against one another without interference. When they finally acknowledged each other, it felt less like an introduction and more like confirmation, as if something long suspected had finally been named. Miguel carried himself with a carefulness that mirrored Clara's own. He spoke little, moved deliberately, and listened in a way that suggested he had learned to survive by paying attention. There was history in his eyes, not dramatic, not loud, but dense, the kind that accumulated quietly and never fully left. They didn't ask questions that required answers. They shared fragments instead. Clara spoke about leaving things behind without specifying what. Miguel spoke about roads that ended too suddenly, about choices that couldn't be undone, about time behaving like a debt that always came due. They never pressed, never demanded clarity. The absence of interrogation felt like trust. What formed between them was fast but not reckless, intense but not loud. In Los Angeles, love often arrived disguised as urgency, as if the city itself understood that nothing here lasted long unless it was protected fiercely. Clara felt it growing in her chest, steady and terrifying. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something she needed to outrun. Miguel felt it too, though differently. For him, the connection carried weight, not excitement, responsibility. He knew things Clara didn't, things that made every shared moment feel borrowed at night. He walked home through streets that knew his name, even if they never spoke it. Old corners, old faces, old debts that didn't age gracefully. He avoided certain routes, certain lights, certain memories that still recognized him. He carried his secret like a fracture that never healed correctly, functional, but fragile. Clara sensed the distance before she understood it. Miguel began to change in subtle ways. His silences grew longer. His gaze drifted when the future came up. He started checking his surroundings more often, as if measuring exits. When Clara reached for him, he responded, always, but with a hesitation that hadn't been there before. Fear, when familiar, is louder than love. Clara had learned that lesson young. She had been left before, not dramatically, not with explanations, just absence where commitment once stood. Los Angeles had been both witness and accomplice to that abandonment. The idea of it happening again tightened her chest in ways she couldn't explain. So when Miguel suggested leaving, it felt like relief disguised as risk. Not a fantasy, not someday, a real place, a real night, a station at the edge of the city, long forgotten, barely used anymore. One train still passed through after midnight. Slow, indifferent, reliable. They wouldn't need tickets immediately. Just momentum. Miguel framed it simply. If they reached that place, everything could begin again. He wrote the note himself, folded once, placed in Clara's hand like a fragile promise. The paper felt thin, the words heavy. She read it again and again, in the days that followed. As if repetition could guarantee truth, the night arrived, colder than expected. Los Angeles rarely acknowledged winter, but when it did so without mercy. The air bit through fabric. The sky stayed dark, refusing even the illusion of stars. Clara dressed lightly, intentionally, as if weight might slow her escape. She reached the station early. It stood like a forgotten thought at the edge of the city. Concrete cracked, signs faded. One bench remained under a single working lamp, its light trembling, casting long, distorted shadows. The tracks stretched into darkness in both directions, promising departure without reassurance. Clara sat. She waited. Time behaved strangely there. Minutes stretched, sounds amplified, the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind through broken glass, her own breath growing uneven. Every approaching footstep made her heart rise, then fall. Miguel didn't come. The clock advanced without apology. Hope thinned. Fear took its place. Clara stayed longer than she should have. Long enough for belief to turn into something fragile and sharp. When she finally stood, the cold had settled into her bones. The city felt larger again. Hungrier, she left without looking back. Los Angeles absorbed the moment like it absorbed everything else. Miguel reached the edge of the station's district and stopped. Not because he hesitated about going forward, but because he understood exactly what moving forward would cost. The night pressed against his shoulders with the weight of unfinished things. Los Angeles stretched around him in layers, polished avenues glowing in the distance, and closer, the streets that never appeared on postcards, streets that remembered him. He checked the time once. Too early to miss her. Too late to turn back without consequences. Miguel had spent years learning how to live quietly. After leaving behind a life built on shortcuts and wrong alliances, he had tried to become someone forgettable. The city allowed reinvention, but it never erased debts. It only postponed collection. Clara didn't know the shape of the danger that followed her, but Miguel did. Her past was not loud. It didn't announce itself with threats or sirens. It lingered instead, patient and methodical. Attached to names she had once trusted and choices she had made when survival demanded speed over caution. Clara believed she had escaped it by leaving one neighborhood, then another, then an entire version of herself behind. What she didn't know was that some exits looped back. Miguel had recognized the signs weeks earlier. A car parked too often on the same corner, a man pretending to look at his phone for too long, a question asked casually, in a place where casual questions were never innocent. Los Angeles had taught him how to read those patterns. He had lived inside them once. When he realized the threat wasn't aimed at him, but at Clara, something shifted permanently. Love, for Miguel, didn't feel like warmth. It felt like obligation. He traced the route in his mind again. Station to street, street to alley, alley to meeting, that should not exist anymore. He told himself it would be quick. A clarification, a warning. Enough to redirect attention away from Clara and onto himself, where it belonged. He turned away from the station. Each step felt heavier than the last. The city seemed to close ranks, buildings leaning in, shadows thickening. He passed places that still recognized his face, bars where he had once waited for calls that meant trouble, corners where favors had been traded like currency. None of them surprised him. What surprised him was how calm he felt. Miguel had always believed fear would define the moment he paid for his past. Instead, there was clarity, a narrowing of possibilities until only one remained. He had made many wrong choices before. This one felt different, necessary. The meeting happened in a structure that pretended to be abandoned. A warehouse near the river channel, its windows boarded, graffiti layered thick enough to feel intentional. Inside, the air smelled of oil and damp concrete. The men waiting there had aged poorly. Hard lives left visible marks. Miguel didn't sit Asterisk. He stood under a single hanging light, its flicker echoing the one Clara now waited beneath miles away. He spoke carefully, choosing words that redirected interest, reshaped narratives, erased Clara's relevance from the equation. He made himself the problem again. That was the deal. What he didn't anticipate was how eager they were to accept it. Past affiliations never truly dissolved. They transformed, mutated, waited. Miguel's presence confirmed suspicions they hadn't yet voiced. His attempt to protect Clara became proof of leverage. The exchange escalated faster than expected. Miguel absorbed the violence quietly, not with defiance, not with dramatics, just acceptance. Every impact felt like subtraction, time removed, options closed, outcomes sealed. He thought once of the station clock, of Clara watching minutes slip away. Assuming the worst, he hoped she would leave. When the night finally released him, it did so without ceremony. His body was found where the city placed things it didn't want to explain. The report would be short, vague. Another man swallowed by Los Angeles. Without witnesses willing to remember, Clara never heard about it directly. Days passed before fragments reached her half-stories. Rumors she tried not to recognize. Miguel's name surfaced once, then disappeared. No confirmation, no closure, just absence solidified into fact. She blamed herself first, for trusting too quickly, for believing escape was possible, for sitting on that bench and expecting someone else to save her. The city felt colder now, sharper. Every street corner carried accusation. She left Los Angeles quietly. No goodbyes, no addresses left behind. She packed what fit into one bag and boarded a bus before sunrise. The city receded without resistance, as if relieved to be done with her. Years passed. Clara rebuilt herself carefully, layer by layer. New work, new routines, new names spoken by people who never asked where it came from. She avoided love, avoided stillness, avoided places that reminded her of waiting. But memory is not something distant, dissolves. Los Angeles returned to her in dreams, not the skyline, the bench, the light, the certainty she had felt before it collapsed. She told herself it didn't matter, that Miguel had chosen something else, that abandonment didn't require explanation. Time made the lie easier to carry, not lighter. When she finally returned, it wasn't intentional. A work obligation, a brief stay, no emotional investment. She promised herself she wouldn't visit the station. That chapter was closed. But closure is rarely cooperative. On her last evening, she found herself walking without direction. The city had changed just enough to feel unfamiliar. New buildings rose where old ones had collapsed. Yet some things resisted replacement. The station still stood. The bench remained under a newer lamp, brighter but no warmer. Clara approached it slowly, heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt in years. She sat without planning to. Her hand brushed against something beneath the wood. A folded paper. Old, yellowed, hidden, deliberately. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. Only one sentence remained legible. If you're reading this, I managed to save you. Understanding arrived without sound, not relief, not peace. Truth. Miguel had not abandoned her, he had protected her. The weight of that love settled into her chest, immense, irreversible. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't demand recognition. It simply existed, complete in its silence. Clara stayed on the bench until the city lights shifted and the night thinned. She didn't wait for anything anymore. She remembered. Clara did not cry when the understanding settled. Tears belonged to moments that still believed in repair. What took hold of her on that bench was something heavier and quieter, a recognition that arrived whole, without negotiation. Miguel's absence rearranged itself in her memory. No longer a wound shaped like rejection, but a deliberate emptiness carved to keep her alive. The station breathed round her. Los Angeles at night had always been indifferent, but now it felt observant, as if the city, having taken its payment years earlier, was watching to see what she would do with what remained. The lamp above the bench hummed softly, steady and unromantic. Trains still passed, though fewer now, their metal bodies gliding through without pause, without acknowledgement. Clara stayed long enough for the cold to return to her hands. She thought about the version of herself who had waited there before, smaller, tighter, convinced that love only ended one way, that Clara had believed abandonment was the natural conclusion of attachment. She had been wrong, but not foolish. She had simply lacked the information that only sacrifice could reveal. Miguel had loved her in a language she had never learned to recognize. She folded the note carefully and placed it back where she had found it, not because she wanted to leave it behind, but because some things did not belong to being carried. They belonged to places, to moments fixed in time. When she stood, her legs trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from release. The station no longer felt like a site of failure. It felt like a marker, the place where one life had ended so another could continue. Clara walked away without looking back, for the first time. It wasn't escape. The days that followed passed gently. Los Angeles no longer pressed against her the way it once had. She moved through the city as a visitor, not a fugitive. Streets she had once avoided now felt neutral, harmless. The city had lost its authority over her story. On her last morning, she packed slowly, intentionally. Each movement felt grounded. She didn't rush. The urge to flee had dissolved, replaced by something unfamiliar, permission to stay still. At the airport, she watched planes lift into the pale sky, their ascent smooth and unremarkable. Years ago, she would have imagined herself on one of them, heart racing, convinced that departure was salvation. Now, movement felt optional. She carried Miguel with her, not as a burden, but as orientation. Back home, wherever that was now, life resumed its quiet patterns. Clara returned to work, to routine, to days that no longer needed to be defended against. She allowed herself to rest in moments instead of scanning them for exits. People noticed the change without understanding it. She smiled more, not brightly, but honestly. Love did not return quickly. When it did, it arrived carefully, respectfully. Clara didn't compare. She didn't replace. She understood now that love was not diminished by silence or time. It expanded to include what had come before. Some nights, she thought of Miguel walking away from the station, not with regret, but with resolve. She imagined his steps steady, his choice already made. In those thoughts, he never hesitated. He never doubted the outcome. He had fulfilled the promise. Years later, when Clara passed through Los Angeles again, briefly, unintentionally, she didn't visit the station. She didn't need to. The place existed intact within her, preserved without decay. The city remained what it had always been, loud, unforgiving, full of people, chasing beginnings and outrunning endings. Clara moved through it untouched, a woman no longer defined by what she had survived. Some loves are meant to be lived. Others are meant to be understood. Miguel's had been the latter, complete, irreversible, and absolute in its quiet conclusion. The place where she never arrived remained unchanged. But Clara no longer needed to siga. Clara had once believed that understanding was the end of pain. She learned, slowly, that understanding was only the beginning of something quieter and far more demanding. Coexistence, living alongside a truth without trying to reshape it, letting it occupy space without turning it into a shrine or a wound. On the months after her return from Los Angeles, she noticed how differently time behaved. Days no longer rushed her forward, nights no longer dragged her backward. Life moved with an evenness she had never known, as if the internal alarm that had governed her decisions for years had finally gone silent. She stopped dreaming of running. Instead, she dreamed of ordinary things: grocery aisles, window lights shifting across a wall, hands resting on tables, without urgency. These dreams confused her at first. They felt undeserved, but she let them come. There were moments when Miguel surfaced unexpectedly, not as an image, not as a voice, but as a sensation. A pause before crossing the street, a decision to take a longer route home, an instinct to step away from something that felt slightly wrong. His influence expressed itself not in memory, but in reflex. She realized then that he had not only saved her life, he had altered its trajectory. Clara began volunteering at a community center without quite knowing why. The work was unglamorous: filing, sorting donations, sitting with people who didn't want advice, only presence. She found herself comfortable there, in that quiet usefulness. It mirrored something Miguel had understood instinctively, that significance did not require spectacle. She never told his story. Not fully, not to anyone. It wasn't secrecy. It was protection, the kind that didn't shield pain from others, but preserved its integrity. Reducing what he had done to a lesson or a confession felt like a betrayal of its purity. Some acts were diminished by explanation. Occasionally, someone asked about her past. About Los Angeles, about why she had left and why she didn't speak of it much. Clara answered simply. She said the city had given her what she needed and taken what it required. Most people accepted that without curiosity. Those who didn't were not meant to stay. Years accumulated gently. Her hair showed subtle signs of time. Lines appeared near her eyes, earned rather than feared. She grew into herself with a steadiness that surprised her. Life did not become extraordinary. It became sufficient. There was love again, not the consuming kind, not the desperate kind. This love moved at human speed. It respected pauses. It didn't demand proof of devotion through sacrifice. Clara recognized its difference immediately and accepted it. Without guilt, she understood now that Miguel's love had not been a template, it had been an exception. On one quiet evening, long after the urgency of survival had faded from her body, Clara found herself sitting alone in a small park near her apartment. The bench beneath her was unremarkable, painted wood, slightly uneven. Children's voices echoed somewhere nearby, softened by distance. She noticed how easily she sat without scanning for exits. That was when the weight of it reached her fully. Not grief. Gratitude. Miguel had given her this. The ability to exist without bracing for impact. To sit in the world without expecting it to collapse. He had absorbed what would have broken her, without asking to be remembered for it. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the evening air settle on her skin. Somewhere, trains still passed through empty stations. Somewhere, benches waited under indifferent lamps. The world continued its indifferent motion, offering moments without guarantees. Clara opened her eyes and stood. She walked home at an unhurried pace, carrying nothing she needed to escape from. Time eventually does what it always does. It places distance between events and emotions, softening edges without erasing meaning. Clara grew older. So did the memory of Miguel, not fainter, but more integrated. He became less a figure from the past and more a quiet principle guiding her present. She learned to identify moments of choice. They arrived disguised as inconveniences, as discomfort, as chances to walk away instead of staying. In those moments, she felt the echo of his decision, not as pressure, but as clarity. Choose what protects others. Choose what ends harm. Choose what doesn't need applause. Clara never framed it as sacrifice. She framed it as continuity. On a return trip years later, one she did choose, she passed through Los Angeles again, briefly, without ceremony. The city had transformed further, layers replacing layers, yet its essence remained unchanged. It still consumed quickly. It still rewarded speed over care. She stood on a platform in a different station, waiting for a different train, and noticed how unremarkable it felt. The past had lost its gravity. Miguel did not belong to the city anymore. He belonged to her internal geography, mapped, known, no longer destabilizing. As the train arrived, Clara stepped aboard without hesitation. She took a seat by the window, watching the city slide away. There was no note in her pocket this time, no promise to escape, no urgency attached to movement. Just motion. The train pulled forward, steady and unremarkable, carrying her into a life that no longer required saving. The original station remains, a bench under a lamp, no one waiting, no one arriving late, only a place that once held a decision powerful enough to echo through years, and a woman, somewhere else now, living inside the freedom that decision created.